Hey, welcome to the first edition of the Table Talk podcast from West Towne Christian Church. I'm Kaleb, and I'm here with David, and this is just something we wanted to launch, kind of actually bring back, David, a little bit of a throwback, relaunching a more weekly, just kind of conversation podcast, diving into some of the message from Sunday, some of the weekly theme, and it's something we've wanted to get back to for a long time. We've actually upgraded a nice little spot here. We've actually cleared out the sanctuary from everybody else. Yeah. So get out, we're talking. And just hope that this is kind of a nice resource for you guys through the week, and hopefully good thing for us too to process kind of what we've been stirring in our hearts over the last week or so.
Yeah, and this is like the perfect series to jump off on this. The whole series is talking about gathering around a table and having discussions, and how do we handle these discussions, and how do we do it in a godly way. Any kind of discussion, whether it's political, whether it's religious, no matter what it is, those questions that could be tough. How do we handle those, and what do we do with those?
Right. So. Yeah, because it's hard. I mean, that's what this series is all about, is the idea of, we've kind of lost the art of conversation in our culture, but as followers of Jesus, we're called to engage with people and called to have conversations, and sometimes about pretty difficult things. And just how do we do that well? How does Jesus lead us into that? And it's fitting that we're recording this on Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't know what's going on, what's going to happen. But it's one of those things that a lot of people talk about, I'm sure, for the next few days.
Yeah, and because I've been busy with church stuff, I haven't even been looking at it. I don't know, which is kind of nice.
Yep. So, it's like I see memes on Twitter, and that's about all I see.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, I've checked Twitter one time today, and that's it. And so, and they said we don't know.
Yep.
And so, but we're in the middle of this, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But that's kind of what your conversation, or what your sermon was on Sunday was how do we talk about politics? How do we approach politics in these conversations with family, and how do we approach them with people that we love, and do it with truth, but also with love?
Yeah, right, exactly. And kind of the main thing that we hit on Sunday was this idea that kingdom living flows from a kingdom perspective.
Yes.
And so, like, in the world, we are engaged in the world. Like, who leads our country does matter. Like, who we vote for in elections matter. And I think God leads different people to different conclusions on that sometimes, and that's okay, but that stuff does matter, but it's not the ultimate thing. Like, it is not the end all be all, because God throughout history has still reigned and still acted and still been in control, no matter who is in earthly control.
Yep, definitely, and we just finished that series on Daniel.
Yeah,
and the whole series of Daniel, the whole book of Daniel is just a beautiful picture of that. That just reminds us, like, that God is in control.
Yeah,
like even when things are hard, even when everything feels out of control in our lives and in our government, when things don't feel fair, we can trust that God is still in control.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was really the point of why we did Daniel when we did it, was because we knew we were heading into this kind of contentious time, and we didn't want to talk about, like, the election or politics. Like, that's not really the point, but it's like Daniel frames up what we're going to be experiencing and feeling so well, because we are at least I do, feel somewhat like an exile in the world. Peter says that we are aliens and exiles. We are foreigners and exiles in the world. And a lot of times it's these seasons, these tough kind of cultural seasons, that to me really bring that home. Yeah. And it should be a reminder of that. And so Daniel being able to remain faithful, and not just remain faithful, but to influence multiple kings, multiple kingdoms and empires, and kind of restore a beautiful place within them for the Jewish people. His example is something that should push us forward during this time, especially.
Definitely. And I think it's worth noting is, like, in Daniel, you get to the end of Daniel, right before he has all these incredible visions and sees the Messiah and sees this. And after he has all of that and all these amazing things happen, he still feels like, I just want to be home.
Right. Yep.
And I'm not comfortable here, and I don't think we should be comfortable here. I don't think there should be a comfort level for us in this world that where we're just like, well, this is just home. This is what we do.
Right.
These are our politics. We should be able to say, I don't like how all of this is going. This isn't, because this isn't our home.
Right.
So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was what I tried to get at a little bit Sunday was, I mean, I can do it, and I think we all do it. We get a little confused, and we get things out of order, and we start feeling a little too comfortable around the world's tables. And it's like, no, like God is preparing his own table for us in his kingdom, and that should be the table, the space, the environment that our hearts are focused on. But it is hard, like when we're just constantly bombarded with news and outrage and tweets and all these things. It's difficult to kind of stay above it. And again, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just what is your ultimate, kind of reality in your heart? What are you focusing on more, kingdoms of the world or the kingdom of God? And sometimes we got to kind of check ourselves with that.
Sure. And not that those things aren't things we have to think about, or not that those are tables that we may not sit at at some point where we may visit or we may step in and go, hey, I'm passionate about it in this area. This is something that I think is really important.
Yeah.
Like people throughout history have done that.
For sure.
And they've done it because their faith has compelled them to.
Right.
And they've made huge changes because they've been willing to take a seat at that table for a moment.
Yeah.
But I think you look at those great leaders in history, they all knew their main table was the Lord's table, if that makes sense. Like that's the one that they wanted to be. They wanted to be their table, and most of the time it's because they want to bring other people into that table, and they're not just focused on whatever little table is off to the side. Bring them into that. It's like, no, let's bring them to God's table.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where we'll get to in this series eventually. Is we're going to kind of build to his table and look at the differences between kind of the invitation to God's table versus how often like our tables here are limited and closed off and highly dependent on your point of view, maybe what tables you're invited to. So we'll get to that. And I think that kind of idea of just having the proper perspective should impact us and challenge us a lot regularly in a regular time.
Yeah.
But this is an election week, and I'm sure whatever happens, it's going to be tense and tough for a few days. So how do we hold on to like a kingdom perspective in the midst of this week particularly? Like what are some ways that we can really try to keep our eyes fixed on the main thing here?
Yeah, I think just in life in general, it's so easy when you think something's so important that you'll put it first.
Yeah.
And they're not even always bad things like marriage or your kids or your job. Like those aren't bad things, or an election. It's not a bad thing to have in your life. Like those are all good things. Like it's all good things to be a part of. But when I've seen the worst times I've seen in my life, whether in my marriage, with my kids, with my job and stuff like that, is actually when I'm putting those things before God.
Yeah.
And it makes things so much harder. And it's the same thing with the election. It's easy. It could be easy for me to slip into getting on social media all before I spend time with God.
Right.
It's easy for me to slip into watching a video or whatever, rather than putting God first and making sure that I'm right with Him. Because when your relationship with God, when this is broken, my mind with that, like relationships can't go well when your relationship with God isn't growing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's to keep that at the forefront of our mind, not just during an election week, but like you said, with anything, is that's what following Jesus has to be about. The kingdom and his ways and his righteousness have to be the first thing we consider.
Yep.
And I think, a lot of times we lose sight of that because, we are desiring, like you said, often good things, good marriages, good families, even like good things for ourselves. It's not necessarily a bad desire to have. Whatever your definition of a good thing for the country is, you might desire that too. And all those things are not bad in and of themselves, It's just that Jesus says, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we want to go for the added to first, and then we miss out on that, seeking the kingdom first. And not only does that, hurt our ability to see a kingdom perspective, but I think it hurts other people's ability to see a kingdom perspective too.
Definitely.
And as people who are called on mission into the world with God, we need to be careful about how we're reflecting on him to the people that he sent us on mission to.
Definitely, yeah. And the balance between truth and love and those type of that is a hard balance that goes into all of these conversations. And is how do I balance this truth and love, and how do I make sure that I'm a good ambassador for God's kingdom here on earth? How do I make sure that people want to come to this table, even when we may not see things the same?
Right. And that's, we'll get to that a little bit in the weeks to come, because I think it's okay to acknowledge that we might not all see things the same way, whether that's theologically or politically or culturally, or just even in the teams that we root for, right? I mean, there are differences that we have, and the differences shouldn't be dividers, at least in most cases, right? I mean, if Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector can both be apostles of Jesus following him, there's got to be some room for difference of opinion there. And ultimately, I think, those differences should kind of fade in the light of the most important thing, which is that we're followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
Those differences might still be there, and we might still hold certain things, but ultimately we can both come around his table and go, that doesn't matter as much. What matters is that we're both following Jesus, and we both believe he's Lord. And just because that might play out a little bit differently in the way you see things and me, that's okay. If we see him first, I think we can have a lot of solid common ground there to build from.
Yeah. And that's the only way that you can have open conversations about that. And that's honestly the only way that I think you can even make that people can be open to,
for sure.
is like, hey, if we have this kingdom perspective, if we're coming from God's, then I actually should be open to hear you out, listen to what you're saying, process it, and think of it through a kingdom mindset, where it feels like so much online is just people butting heads together. It's like, are they actually going to change their mind? Well, no, but I just dunked on you.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like those are the conversations that you see online so often. But when we come from a kingdom perspective, I want to be able to say, well, me and Kaleb are different on how we think about this, whether it's sports or politics or theological differences on things. I want to be able to listen to what you're saying, understand it, and go, I see where you're coming from, and maybe even say, well, this is where I'm coming from, so you can be open and see where I'm coming from.
For sure. And I think that's how church has to work. I think that's how the community of believers has to work, because we aren't all the same. We aren't all the same. We all come from different backgrounds and have different perspectives on some things. And in order for this community to work, we have to be willing to humbly allow for that other perspective and trust that, okay, I know that the Spirit of God's in this person. I know that God's working in this person. So maybe they can teach me something too. Do I have something to teach them? Sure. But they can also teach me something too. I mean, that's how I think we grow and develop and become more well-rounded in a community together.
For sure. I agree.
For instance, we disagree on the 2022 Robert Pattinson Batman movie.
Yes. I think it's terrible. I think it's one of the worst movies that I've ever seen.
And I think it's a work of art. But here we are.
And I am completely correct on that.
Sure.
And
sure you are.
And you could never change my mind.
Yeah. See? But we get along. It's okay. It happens.
For the most part.
For the most part. But yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that where it's like, oh, we disagree. Yeah. Of course, that's trivial. But and it can be okay.
But we have other things. We have things that we've disagreed on in this building.
Right.
Many times, and I typically come away from this conversation going, I love Kaleb, and I know he loves the Lord, and I know he's trying. I know where his mind is going, and my hope is that you come from that too. Like David loves the Lord. He has this perspective, and even though we don't disagree, still one of my best friends.
Right,
and it's like we come out of that even when we have differences, and so for me, that's really valuable.
Yeah,
you know,
I 100% agree, and I think it's edifying. Like it is something that I think it's a gift from God to have friendships and relationships with people who don't always see things the same way. Because again, I need that perspective of what God's teaching you in order for me to see Him more clearly. And I really think that that's how all this works. Is like, if I trust you're following Him, and I trust that His Spirit's at work in you, and I see the fruits of the Spirit in your life, which we'll get to in just a minute with prayer.
Yeah.
If I don't see it, then I might be a little less inclined to want to hear you out. Yeah. But if I see like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all that stuff, then I go, okay, this is God's Spirit working within them.
Yeah.
And there's probably something here that I need to see.
Yeah.
And that's good. We should welcome that. That's formation and discernment and discipleship.
And it's okay to have those conversations and come around away from those conversations and say, we don't agree on it.
Yeah.
And then to take in the things, take in the criticisms or whatever it is that are valid and go, I need to make sure that I'm sticking to, that I'm listening, thinking about those and bringing those in. And then the things that are not, that you don't see as valid or whatever it is, be able to drop those, put those to the side and say, well, I don't really agree with those, but I do think that is something for me to put in my mind and think, how do I sound? How am I, when I say that, when I think about that, how am I sounding, or how does it look when I say that, if that makes sense?
100%. Yeah. And it's not like, I think what you said is great. Like, it's not that we're all going to sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya and all agree on everything. We won't. Like that's not going to happen. But it is like, am I seeking out the heart in the other person to pick up those pieces of that? There's some truth in that, or I needed to hear that, and that's good.
And it's biblical in the sense of when you look after Jesus's resurrection, there was still even some tension there with the disciples. You have like Paul, and you have is it Peter that Paul calls out Peter for
in front of the whole cafeteria,
in front of everybody, and he says, hey, he's kind of, there's some interest. And so like they both loved each other, respected each other. Peter calls Paul's writing scripture. Like he calls it, he says it's like the other, he calls Paul's writing scripture. And yet they still loved each other, and they were still able to have those conversations and not break, we're not brothers anymore or whatever. And it's like, that's biblical.
Yeah, it is. And I think we forget that. Like unity in Christ is not conformity to each other's opinions.
Sure. That's great.
It's conformity to the image of Jesus, for sure. But it's definitely not conformity to each other's opinions. And I think we miss that sometimes. I do. And so with kind of that in mind, like I kind of ended the sermon Sunday with really this emphasis on prayer. Like I think we sometimes want to jump into doing the work, but it's like, no, you have to start with allowing God to do His work in you. What are some ways that you've like incorporated prayer just into your day during this tense time?
Yeah, and really for me, it's even more than just during this tense time. It's been something that I've had to try to make sure that I'm putting parameters in myself so that my life is filled with prayer. And sometimes it's things that you might feel like, oh, he's being legalistic or nitpicky or something like that. And it's like, for me, I really try to, when I wake up and before I go to bed, get on my knees and pray. I'm not perfect at it. I don't. Sometimes I lay in bed and I go, I can't even get up. And I pray, and probably half the time I fall asleep while I'm praying. And so like, but I do try to get on my knees, like physically do something that takes me out of that moment and takes me away, humbles me, and so that I can go to God and say, hey God, help me in this time. Yeah,
no, that's great. And I think just that might look different for everybody, but having some type of structure in place, I think is good. I usually pray in the car, like on my way here and on my way home. Really, I mean, if I'm by myself in the truck, at some point I'm usually praying, and that to me is kind of like that space. My spiritual director kind of gave me this idea that, as you're going to or coming from a place, you're kind of setting apart that time as like a sacred time. And so that's been really helpful for me, because I don't know about you guys, but I do sometimes like to sleep in and roll out of bed with 10 minutes running to be somewhere and then get there. But it's like that time as I'm traveling, which tends to happen a lot. I tend to drive a lot. Becomes that space for me, and that can be anywhere for you. That can be in the mornings on your knees. That can be in the afternoon on your back porch. That can be during your lunch break at a coffee shop. Wherever you kind of have that time set apart just to commune with God. Yeah. That's got to be the rooted piece of it for me. And so that looks different for everybody. I think there's some common like structures you can put in place, but
definitely. And I thinking about it throughout the day.
Sure.
The Bible talks. I can't remember where it is, but it says, with your children, talk about it when you wake up, as you walk along the road, as you eat your food, as you go to bed. It's like this is something that should be baked into your life.
Yeah.
And the more you pray, the more I find you want to pray.
Yeah.
And the more you see God working, and the more you start to realize, ooh, God's showing me something. Same thing with reading your Bible and stuff like that. But especially when you feel, if you feel tense, or if you feel anxious, or if you're seeing something that you really feel like you want God to be a part of and to give you peace on, election, family, marriage,
finances, whatever it is,
all those things, taking that time to make sure that you're going to God first, a lot of times will set your perspective right.
100%.
And a lot of times I go, while I'm praying, I'll be like, I'm probably not coming from this from a right angle. And especially, which I think is probably good for this conversation, is praying for what we would see as enemies.
Yes,
and
sure.
Praying for people that we see as on the other side, or somebody that we see that is against us, or somebody that we feel like, man, they're against me. They're the worst, or I just can't stand it, or they're not speaking truth. Like those are those. When you pause and you pray for those people, it forces you to think of them as a person.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can be very helpful in times like this.
For sure. I mean, you have to. I mean, Jesus is clear about it. We have to pray for those who are our enemies and who would even persecute us. Like that's kind of Sermon on the Mount 101. And it's tough. Yeah. It's not easy. Because I think sometimes we're tempted to do that and pray for them in a way that's like, well, God, bring them around. Yeah. You know, God, help them see the way that I see it. And it's like, I think we're like actually pray for them. Yeah. Like that they have a good day, for their well-being, like that they're protected, that they would come to know who God is, and not in this like, well, I hope they find out before they get. It's like, no, I want them to have a fruitful relationship with God. Yeah. Because I genuinely desire that for them. Yeah. And that's tough, but yeah, that is a huge piece of this that gets lost because we get so focused on us versus whoever. Yeah. It's like, no, I still want good for them. I may disagree on the definition of good, but I ultimately know that the goodness is knowing God. And so I want that for everyone. Yeah, and to be able to say, God, let your will be done in all of this. And that should be a big stress reliever for us, is knowing that God's will be done. For sure. Yeah. Like I believe he is in control. We just went through that whole Daniel book, and it's like he's in control. When I pray and I say, God, I'm giving this control to you. I trust that you're in control. I'm still going to do my part. I'm still going to pray for these people. I'm still going to do what I think you have called me to do. Yeah. But I know ultimately you're in control. Yep, 100%. And that takes pressure off of you to go and fix the world, which is, I think, a lot of times is what we want. It comes from a good place. Yeah. Or fix the world, fix our marriage, fix our children, or whatever. Fix your opinion on the Batman movie. Yes, fix your opinion on the Batman movie. No, like to be able to fix those things, and it's like, well, God's in control. Let him work. Yeah. And watch. Yep. Because God's going to do something cool, and those are the times where you go,
oh man, God's working big time.
100%. And we're called to faithfulness in the middle of that. As we wait for him to work, prayer, faithfulness, and we trust that he's going to do it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I think this has been a great conversation so far. I am excited to come back and have some more of these over the next few weeks. And this is going to be a weekly thing that we're going to be doing here. So be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to Spotify, all those places. And we will see you on the next episode of Table Talk.